said 10 minutes. Me. It's been almost exactly 10 minutes. Boom, baby. That was wild timing. I'm not going to lie. Like, literally the second that I started the stream, my fiance texted me and was like, I need you to come get me urgent care. So I ran and it was fine. Everything's fine. We're all good. Everyone is healthy. Everybody is good. But I will tell you, I have had the most wild couple of days. I don't know what has happened to me, but in the last few days, I don't know. I don't know, you guys. I'm living in a chaotic time. Also, our stream is acting up, so give me 1 second. I'm just making sure we're good to go here. We might just be dealing with like a mega lag. It's highly possible. Wow. Well, I hope that we're just dealing with a mega lag because that would be unfortunate. Yes, we are. Okay, good. You guys. It's Tuesday. It feels like Monday. Everybody just roll with me, okay? We're dealing with a lag, but we're fine. Everything's fine. Okay, the last few days, my parents say that I have a tendency to overshare things, which is probably why I went into commentary and content creation because I have no filter. So I just kind of word vomit everything out of my mouth in terms of where I'm at in life, how I feel about things, how we should be reacting to things in the world. And the last few days, I have been so sick. So I will spare you all of the details. But, like, I have no idea where this came from. I have not been this sick to my stomach since 5th grade when I had to miss an entire week of school because I had the stomach flu. So thank God we're good. Everything's good. But for the last 48 hours, was I convinced that I was dying? Yes. Like, a large part of me was convinced this is it. This is how I go. So I wish that upon no one, not even my worst enemy. And I hope that all of you are feeling healthier than I was feeling the last couple of days. But sleep is a magical thing and it makes you feel so much better. And so I just slept as much as humanly possible all day Sunday, all day Monday because I had work off yesterday, which was great. And I know that we missed the stream on Thursday and Friday when I started to get a fever and I didn't feel great. So thank you for just rolling with me and cutting things a little bit early on Thursday, not streaming on Friday, not having a stream yesterday. Your girl feels moderately better, but at least as a functional human being at this point in time, and is very happy to be streaming with all of you guys tonight. We have a bit of a different vibe for the stream tonight. We're going like real nerdy, so it's not going to be super long. I don't want to get too much in the weeds and confuse people and make your heads explode with information that took me an entire semester to learn in my master's degree program at Georgetown University. But I'm seeing this prevailing theme on social media and several actual news articles suggesting that President Biden actually gave up U.S. sovereignty to the World Health Organization in future pandemic response. And I'll admit, when I saw this headline, my brain exploded because I have a degree in biomedical sciences long before I ever went into content creation or live streaming or commentary in any way, or even politics. My dream was to be a surgeon. So my degree is in biomedical sciences. I ended up pursuing my master's degree at Georgetown in biomedical sciences policy and advocacy. So basically all of this, how the government and private entities and other public entities around the world, other government entities in the UN, and everybody works together to create a stronger scientific future. It was fascinating getting that master's degree from the school year of 2019 to 2020 and seeing in real time how our response completely threw out the window anything that we had ever done with pandemics in the past, asking the experts, the top people at the WHO, at the CDC, in the United States government, what we were doing wrong and what we were doing different as COVID was coming onto the scene. It was an absolutely fascinating human experiment in behavior, not just in how the government was responding to COVID. But when I saw this headline, it like blew up my brain because I was convinced there's no way that the United States actually gave up our sovereignty to an entity of the UN on paper. Like, the whole world would be up in arms about something like this. Wouldn't they? Wouldn't they? So I started doing a little bit more digging beyond the headlines, beyond these few articles that I researched, and have a lot to share with you in terms of the actual nuts and bolts of how this works. Short answer, did we give up our sovereignty? Not really, but also kind of. And longer answer, we've already been doing that for a really long time. So we're going to understand and unpack what all of that means today, what that means for the concept of a new world order, what that means for the concept of global government, where I personally have severe concerns about where this goes from here, but also where people might be blowing this completely out of proportion and finding hysteria just for the sake of manufacturing outrage and finding hysteria, because I think it's important to call this out from both sides when stories get so blown out of proportion that they're not really true anymore just to make a political point or just to be a vehicle for a political point. Wow, that was a really long-winded way to intro this subject to begin with. So, really quick, let's say hi to everybody that are active in our live chat. We are currently live on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Rumble, and on Getter. So happy to be live across platforms with you guys. I see Peggy and Jay in our live chat on Facebook. Jay says you're from Minnesota. Very cool. We love Minnesota. We've got Steelers Nation, Australia. G'day down under, saying it's good on this end. Thank you for clarifying that I was just hallucinating and everything was in fact fine with the live stream. We're all good. So glad you're here. You are here. We've got somebody watching from Poland on YouTube. Super freaking cool. We've got Charles Chamberlain watching on Getter, and we've got a ton of people watching Charles, you're on Rumble. We've got a ton of people watching on Getter. Alex Padron, our guy, is here. Gerald is watching. Big Time James is watching. Blessed Gigi is watching. We've got Tennessee Explorer watching. We've got, as I'm scrolling back through here, DJTGITERDUN. Wow, that is the hardest username ever, is watching on Getter, and so many others. If you guys are joining us for the first time, I know we have a ton of new followers across platforms that have basically spawned out of nowhere. So if you guys are here, hello, I'm so glad that you are here. Make sure to introduce yourself to us in the live chat. We've got somebody watching The Cleaner from Colombia. So cool on YouTube. Make sure you guys utilize that live chat feature throughout the stream. Give us your thoughts, any questions, any reactions. We are extremely interactive, which is what makes us different on these live streams, and I really go out of my way to interact with you guys as much as possible. And just for the sake of kicking off a new week strong, if you are new here and you clicked on this link, or this showed up on a suggested page for you, or you just started following me on Instagram like today and clicked the link in my story, I'm Isabel Brown. I am a full-time independent content creator and live streamer and author and political commentator and public speaker, and I wear a zillion different hats. But I'm really just a 25-year-old girl who one day decided to make a career of getting up every day and telling people the truth. And that is exactly what we do through these live streams, giving you a Gen Z perspective into everything that is going on in the world. It is an unbelievable blessing that this gets to be my life and the format of my career. And I never anticipated that I would be doing something like this, but it's truly been a blessing and such a God thing that I ended up where I am, because it made absolutely no sense, the roundabout path that I took to get here. You guys may notice, if you are an old time viewer and you've been around for a couple of months, you're seeing something different down here. This is a sponsored stream from our amazing friends at Public Square. If you guys are not already familiar with Public Square, they are doing some phenomenal work educating people on where your dollars are going as a consumer. And as you guys know, I'm preaching to the choir. It has never been more important for us to be supporting brands that support our values. And so I'm super excited that Public Square has agreed to be a sponsor of a couple streams here and there. You'll see them a couple times a week. If you guys aren't already plugged into Public Square, you can find them at publicsq.com right here, and you can download their app on the App Store and on the Google Play Store. Public Square, just for reference, is really America's marketplace. Americans are discovering from all walks of life that if we really want to change the way American culture operates and we want to change this nation, we have to start with the way that the marketplace works. That's really the root of America. That change starts with you, it starts with your wallet, and it starts with supporting America First businesses that share your values. Imagine a world, if you will, where every single dollar that you spent could go towards companies that support your values for life, liberty, and prosperity. On this app, you actually can. It's a super unique app and website that I have seen develop substantially over the last several months. They have grown like crazy, and I've been a long-term fan of their company, but they're really directly connecting businesses in your backyard, like a coffee shop or a clothing store or a tire business or a dentist or like literally anything that you can possibly imagine in your zip code and in your area to you, so that you can help support businesses that help support your values, and vice versa. They can find a customer base that helps support their values as well. There are more than 50,000 businesses that are now live on Public Square on the app, and you too can claim a free business listing if you own a small business or you want to get listed in your area by joining us on Public Square. Again, that's publicsq.com, or you can download the app on the App Store and on Google Play. Thank you so much, Public Square. We love you. We stan Public Square in this freaking household. Okay, all of that to be said, we have a lot to dive into today. Just some background if you guys are jumping in. I mentioned this at the beginning of the stream, but I think it provides some important context. I studied biomedical sciences, policy, and advocacy at Georgetown University. What does that mean other than being a massive alphabet word soup of very academic sounding words that don't really seem to mean a lot together? Basically, I took classes for 1 year for my master's degree, which was a 2-year curriculum packed into 1 year that was really packed into like 9 months because of COVID. So it was crazy, but I learned a lot. It honestly was one of the best decisions that I ever made, just in understanding the nuance between health systems and policy and law, and particularly international law, which is an extremely confusing legal area of expertise. But I was very fortunate to take classes at Georgetown Medical School, the Graduate School for Public Policy, and Georgetown Law as well. Even though I wasn't actually a law student yet, I was taking classes with current law students, 1Ls, 2Ls, 3Ls, as well as LLM students. So these were people who already had their law degree, went back to law school, and were specializing in the specific field of health law. And a huge aspect of health law is called the International Health Regulations, or the IHR. Those are basically international health laws that every single country that is already a signatory to the World Health Organization, umbrella subsidiary of the UN, it falls under the blanket of the UN, we already agree to these things. We have ratified these things. We, as a country, have said the international health regulations are something we will follow as international law because we have signed on to be a part of this bigger project called the World Health Organization. You might like that, you might not like that, but that's just facts where we are right now in terms of American approach to international health law. So when I saw this article pop up on my social media feed, I was really confused as to what the author was trying to say, not just explaining where we are right now, but maybe this is something new. So I saw this article from Epic Times, which does absolutely phenomenal work across the board, and I've really enjoyed their reporting for a really long time. But I think people might be taking this article and twisting it for a political purpose, or maybe just reading the headline and not actually reading the entire article, which is why long form content matters. That's why we always dive into things to the deepest level possible on these live streams. We take the time to unpack them. This is not a 15-second video that you're going to see on my TikTok. This is not a 1-minute video that you're going to see on Instagram Reels. These are long form live streams for a reason, because we take the time to unpack them. But I thought it was important for us to unpack this tonight, because so many people have gone out of their way on social media to say that President Biden has just willy-nilly given up all of our sovereignty when it comes to how we handle pandemics, that any pandemic in the future, the United States government will have no say over. While that is partially the direction that we are going in, that's not actually true. And I think it is wrong for us to sensationalize these claims just to make a point or just to make political adversaries look bad, because that's exactly what the other side does to us, and it's the most frustrating thing in the entire world when we are sensationalizing things just to sensationalize them. So this article says Biden admin negotiates deal to give the World Health Organization, the WHO, by the way, it is not WHO, it is not the WHO. If I hear any of you call the WHO the WHO ever again, I will snap your neck in half. Please don't take that as a direct threat, YouTube. It is a joke, obviously, but it drives me absolutely freaking insane when people call it the WHO, because it's not. It is the WHO. Just let's make that clear right now if nobody ever explained that to you. Headline, Biden admin negotiates deal to give the WHO authority over U.S. pandemic policies. A new international health accord Okay, so as a student who has studied this before, I'm thinking there's somewhat of an amendment that has happened to the international health regulations that I already know about. Avoids necessary Senate approval. That's not great, but let's see what that actually means. This is the World Health Organization headquarters in Geneva. I have a lot of problems with the WHO, even as somebody who spent many, many years of her life studying health policy, global health. It's something I'm very interested in, something I will always remain interested in. I've always had issues with the WHO. I think you all can probably guess why, especially in the wake of COVID. But here's what the author wrote. The Biden administration is preparing to sign up the United States to a, quote, legally binding. The fact that this is in quotes immediately made me think, okay, well, what is legally binding? How would we consider that to be legally binding? We'll circle back to that at the risk of sounding like Jen Psaki. Accord with the World Health Organization that would give the Geneva-based United Nations Health Agency the authority to dictate America's policies during a pandemic. Yikes. Despite widespread criticism of the WHO's response to the COVID pandemic, U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra joined the WHO Director General Tedros, who is the worst, by the way. We can spend literally 6 hours explaining why he is the worst, but he is the worst, as is Javier Becerra, who is not actually an expert of health and human services one bit. In fact, he really just took the post because he's an abortion lobbyist, which is unfortunate, but that is a reality that we need to just make sure we understand here. In September 2022, to announce the US WHO Strategic Dialogue. Together, they developed a platform to maximize the longstanding US WHO partnership, which is very longstanding. We were a founding member of the WHO, and to protect and promote the health of all people around the globe, including the American people. So this happened in September. And we're just now talking about it because there's something scheduled for February 27th to actually work out the final details. These discussions and others spawned the zero draft of a pandemic treaty. We're going to open that in a new tab. Published on February 1st, which now seeks ratification by all 194 WHO member states. A meeting of the WHO's Intergovernmental Negotiating Body is set for February 27th, next week, to work out the final terms, which members will then sign. Written under the banner of the world together equitably, one of the reasons I have a problem with the WHO, the zero draft grants the WHO the power to declare and manage a global pandemic emergency. Once a health emergency is declared, all signatories, including the United States, would submit to the authority of the WHO regarding treatments, government regulations such as lockdowns and vaccine mandates, global supply chains, and monitoring and surveillance of population. Interesting. They want to see a centralized vaccine and medication-based response and a very restrictive response in terms of controlling populations, says David Bell, a former WHO staffer specializing in epidemic policy. He was specifically interviewed for this publication, this article. They get to decide what is a health emergency, and they are putting in place a surveillance mechanism that will ensure that there are potential emergencies to declare. The WHO Pandemic Treaty is part of a two-track effort coinciding with an initiative by the World Health Assembly to create new global pandemic regulations. Okay, as somebody who has studied this, immediately, where does my brain go? We're adding things on to the international health regulations, the IHR, which is international law that we have already agreed to. So this is interesting. That would also supersede the laws of member states. The World Health Assembly is the rulemaking body of the WHO, that is correct, comprised of representatives from the member states. Both initiatives are fatally dangerous, says Francis Boyle, a professor of international law at the University of Illinois. Francis said either one or both would set up a worldwide medical police state under the control of the WHO, and in particular the WHO Director General Tedros. Again, he is the worst. If either one or both of these go through, Tedros or his successor will be able to issue orders that will go all the way down the pipe to your primary care physicians. Yikes, if true. Physician Meryl Noss told the Epoch Times, if these rules go through as currently drafted, I, as a doctor, will be told what I am allowed to give a patient and what I am prohibited from giving a patient whenever the WHO declares a public health emergency. So they can tell you that you're getting this drug, but you can't have hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin. Sound familiar? What they're also saying is that they believe in equity, which means everybody in the world gets vaccinated, whether or not you need it, whether or not you're already immune. Regarding medical treatments, the accord would require member nations to monitor and regulate against substandard and falsified pandemic-related products. Based on the previous WHO and Biden administration policy, this would likely include forcing populations to take newly developed vaccines while preventing doctors from prescribing non-vaccine treatments or medicines. Wowza. That's a lot to try to keep up with. How are we doing, people? I know it's a lot. I know we're unpacking a lot of information all at exactly the same time. So let's just touch base. Where is everybody at in the live chat? This is wild. Nick Jordan in our chat says it's unconstitutional, surely, on YouTube. One would imagine, but in fact, it's really never been challenged how much our already agreement to international law, not just in the area of health, but in so many different areas through our membership in the UN, really violates the United States Constitution. It's an incredibly gray area in law currently. And as the daughter of two lawyers, I can tell you the answer to any question, is it constitutional? Is it legal? Is it unconstitutional? It depends. That's the answer. Tennessee Explorer says, yeah, this is called medical tyranny. Fair enough. The Charles Chamberlain says, equity, the great Marxist weapon. Danoni says, what's it called when animals' hair on their back stands up? Great question, and one that we should be asking, frankly, at this moment in time. Jay on Facebook has a great point. We didn't vote for anybody in the WHO. That is correct. You did not vote for anybody in the WHO. So from a constitutional perspective, one would imagine this does not fall under the purview of the United States Constitution, but this is something that we've already agreed to. We've already ratified the international health regulations. I'm really reacting to some of this information for the first time live on the stream, so I'm not going to pretend to be the expert, but we are going to unpack what this new zero draft means here in just a second. The Epic Times has some answered questions for you guys that you guys are currently discussing in the live chat. Is this circumventing the Senate or the Constitution? A key question surrounding the accord is whether the Biden administration can bind the United States to treaties and agreements without Senate consent, which is required under the Constitution. The zero draft, which is the document we're about to pull up in a minute, concedes that, per international law, treaties between countries must be ratified by national legislatures, thus respecting the right of their citizens to consent. So basically, how we have agreed to international law in the past was we wrote this treaty, said countries that wanted to participate in this treaty took it back to their respective legislative bodies of elected representatives, the people that you did elect to represent you, and those people ratified it for you. They basically act as your delegate to ratifying international treaties. This has been seen over and over and over again. War treaties, health treaties, peace treaties, the whole nine. That's where we're at. And that is the way that it should be conducted. However, the Epic Times says, the draft also includes a clause that the accord will go into effect on a provisional basis as soon as it's signed by the delegates to the WHO and would therefore be legally binding on members without being ratified by legislatures. Yikes. Whoever drafted this clause knew as much about U.S. constitutional law and international law as I did, says the con law professor that we just met, and deliberately drafted it to circumvent the power of the U.S. Senate to give its advice and consent to treaties to provisionally bring it into force immediately upon signature. The Biden administration will take the position that this is an international executive agreement. Yikes, if true, that the president can conclude on his own accord without approval by Congress and is binding on the United States of America, including all state and local democratically elected officials, governors, attorney generals, and health officials. In other words, this is uncharted territory. We are just now experiencing what it would mean to have an executive order, basically, at the international level. What happens if the people you voted for, closer to home, not just the president, but closer to home, your delegate through the Senate, your state delegate, doesn't have the opportunity to ratify something bigger than even our federal law? What if the president, on a whim, can basically write an executive order that supersedes United States law, United States sovereignty at the international level, through any branch of the UN, in this case, the World Health Organization, and nobody can do anything about it. Anybody? Phone a friend? We don't know. We have no idea because this has never happened before. Yikes. There are several U.S. Supreme Court decisions that may support the Biden administration's position. Remember how I said the answer is always it depends? They may support, but they may not support it. They include the state of Missouri v. Holland, in which the Supreme Court ruled that the treaties supersede state laws, while other decisions, such as U.S. v. Belmont, ruled that executive agreements without Senate consent can be legally binding with the force of treaties. There are parallels between the WHO pandemic accord and a recent global tax agreement, which the Biden administration signed on to, although Republicans say has no path forward to legislative approval. In the tax agreement, punitive terms are built in that allow foreign countries to punish American companies if the deal isn't ratified by the United States. Sounds like a pretty shitty deal. I don't know about you. As with the tax agreement, administration officials are attempting to appeal to international organizations to impose policies that have been rejected by America's voters. Under the U.S. Constitution, healthcare does not fall under the authority of the federal government, although they really wish that it would in the United States today. It is under the domain of the states. The Biden administration found this to be an unwelcome impediment to its attempts to impose vaccine and mask mandates on Americans when the courts ruled that federal agencies didn't have the authority to do so. To circumvent that, this law professor says they went to the WHO for either the regulations or the treaty to get around domestic opposition. This gets like really in the weeds down here, so I want to take us down to U.S. membership in the WHO. In July 2020, then President Donald Trump withdrew the United States membership from the World Health Organization. I don't know how much you guys remember this, but this was like a really, really big deal. This was 2 months after my graduation, where I was taking World Health Organization law classes at Georgetown, and nobody ever predicted this coming, ever, because the World Health Organization was something that we as the United States of America helped to found. But President Trump cited the health agency's dismal performance in responding to the COVID pandemic and its ties to what he said was the Chinese Communist Party. Trump said that the U.S. funding of about $500 million per year would also cease to the World Health Organization because, shock and amazement, we aren't just like a member of this thing that we helped to start and it's a cool club or you get a sticker and your name is in the roster and you get your picture in the yearbook every year. We actually pay for this entity to exist. And we pay more than any other country pays to make the World Health Organization happen. We also do that for every other single subsidiary of the United Nations, in case you didn't already know that. I know we have a lot of people watching from around the world, not just in the U.S. tonight. So you're welcome for paying for the UN, which is something that we do all the time and nobody ever likes to talk about because money's uncomfortable. But it's true. So we are actually paying, at the time we pulled out, I think we might actually be paying more now, $500 million a year to fund the WHO, which is one of the major reasons that President Donald Trump withdrew the United States from the WHO, saying, why are we paying for something that it's just not working? It's not helping the American people. It's not helping anybody else around the world. At least at this moment in time, it's not doing what it was intended to do when we started it. So we're going to be withdrawing from that now. And I don't know how much you guys remember about that, but that was a really big deal. There are several people in Congress today that say we should no longer be a member of the WHO because now President Joe Biden, then candidate, promised that he would rejoin the WHO on his first day as president. And he did. He did do that. So we've been back in the WHO since January of 2021. On January 12th of this year, there were a few House Republicans that introduced this bill, the No Taxpayer Funding for the World Health Organization Act. It's sponsored by 16 representatives, and their entire argument that's currently being dealt with in Congress is that we do not have representation in the World Health Organization. Whoever said we didn't elect anybody in the WHO, I think it was Jay on Facebook, you're absolutely right. We didn't elect anybody in the WHO, and at least in this particular instance, like this new treaty that is currently being discussed, the zero draft that we're about to dive into, we didn't have anybody, including our Senate, ratify this thing and say that we would be okay with it as the American people. So we're not being fairly represented, and therefore we can't be taxed, or we can't send American taxpayer dollars to fund an organization that isn't serving our people's interest, that isn't serving our nation's interest, that is quite literally taxation without representation. So that's their entire argument. I know this is a lot to unpack. This is super nerdy, and I could easily talk about this for like 6 hours. So I don't want to get too much in the weeds. But basically, what this article told me was, we're basically experiencing the first ever executive order, essentially, at the international level, because the way that this is written, and we're going to pull it up in just a second, there's a clause that says even if the United States Senate doesn't ratify this yet, it automatically goes into effect anyway. So they could choose to not ratify it later, but you know how long things take in Congress. Who wants to deal with all the red tape? Things will get filibustered. Arguments will happen. That just takes so long. Why don't we just immediately put it into effect if we can all agree to it? All of our delegates, aka unelected representatives, on February 27th, next week, in Geneva, if we can all just be on the same page, it'll automatically go into effect. And then if Congress wants to deal with it later, like in the future, that's fine. Knowing pretty darn well we have election season right around the corner for a major presidential election next year. Who knows what's going to happen in the global health world, when a future pandemic is going to be. Newsflash, there will always be pandemics. There always were pandemics. Some are more severe than others, but who knows how we're going to respond to any future illness outbreak, even epidemic in a smaller region in the world right around the corner. Nobody knows. Nobody has any idea. So what an odd way to phrase that to ensure that it goes into effect regardless of what anyone who might oppose whatever agenda there might be would have to say about it. Seems bizarre. But skeptic in me, and just to play devil's advocate, because this is always important in the law, we don't really know how much this is going to change anything yet. And that's why we have to pull this up. This is the longest document of all time. It's 32 pages. I don't really feel like reading that, but you guys can read that, and I will drop the link in this chat for you. I've read the whole thing. You guys should read the whole thing. I just don't think that we should do it in the stream because that will take 8,000 million years, and it's just not quite worth it. I dropped that link in the live chat in case that you guys want to read it, if you want to pull up and follow along, but we're just going to highlight a few important things here. This is the zero draft, aka the non-ratified document of the WHO Convention, Agreement, or other international instrument, what an odd way to phrase that, on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response, CA+. Convention Agreement Plus. Generally, everything you need to know about this document should be right here in the background, methodology, and approach. Number 1. In recognition of the catastrophic failure of the international community in showing solidarity and equity in response to the coronavirus disease pandemic, I think the first sentence just told me everything I need to know about this document. The World Health Assembly, these are the people who make the decisions for the World Health Organization, convened a second special session in December 2021, where it established an intergovernmental negotiating body. Established something new that didn't already exist, open to all member states and associate members, including the United States, we're a member state, to draft and negotiate a WHO convention, agreement, or other international instrument, this document that we're talking about right now, on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response, with a view to its adoption under Article 19 or other provisions of the WHO Constitution, as it may be deemed appropriate. Number 2. In furtherance of the above mandate, this established a process and systematic approach for its work and agreed at its second meeting that the instrument should be legally binding and contain both legally binding as well as non-legally binding elements. In that regard, this identified Article 19 of the WHO Constitution as the comprehensive provision under which the instrument should be adopted, without prejudice to also considering, as the work progressed, the suitability of Article 21. And requested the Bureau to develop and present to the INB a conceptual zero draft of the instrument. Blah, 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 blah. In other words, fancy legal talk for this is going to fit into several different elements of the WHO Constitution that already exist, and it's going to be legally binding according to international health law. So what does international health law mean? What is the Constitution of the World Health Organization? It's a lot more complicated than reading a single document. This shoddy Word document PDF is the Constitution of the World Health Organization. Sometimes I just really can't. If we go all the way through, here's Article 1, Article 2. I learned all about this in graduate school, and it was very difficult to understand when you don't have a huge background in international law. Article 19. This is what that document kept referencing. The Health Assembly shall have the authority to adopt conventions or agreements with respect to any matter within the competence of the organization. A 2/3 vote of the Health Assembly shall be required for the adoption of such agreements, which shall come into force for each member when it is accepted in accordance with its constitutional processes. So according to what we just read in the little intro over here, the United States Senate should have to ratify any provision that 2/3 of the Health Assembly wants to agree to, correct? Article 21 just explains what authority and what regulations they can have, sanitary and quarantine requirements, nomenclature of diseases. I think we all have some good jokes about that the last several years. Standards with respect to diagnostic procedures like testing, standards with respect to the safety, purity, and potency of biological, pharmaceutical, and similar products, advertising and labeling of biological, pharmaceutical, and similar products. With me so far? Everybody with me so far? So if we go back to this new document, our new 32-page friend, at its third meeting, so we've gone through meeting 1, meeting 2, now we're at meeting 3. The I&B agreed that the Bureau, with support from the WHO Secretariat, would prepare the zero draft, what we're reading right now, based on the conceptual zero draft and input received during the third meeting with legal provisions. So basically they had a meeting, they talked about what they wanted to change, they put it all in this document. They agreed that it would be considered at its fourth meeting, happening on February 27th, and then it's going to understand whether or not this is real, whether or not this is a new international health law that we actually have to deal with. Number 4, accordingly, the Bureau has prepared this zero draft for consideration at the fourth meeting. Wow. It's a lot to understand. And it's extremely complicated, right? Because I think people should understand law is always more complicated than you think it is. But more importantly, international law is always 8,000 times more complicated than national law or federal law, which is more complicated than state law, which is more complicated than local law. So we have already agreed, by the way, in case you need the refresher, to somewhat supersede our sovereignty with ratification from the U.S. Senate. That's the caveat. When it comes to international law, that includes international health law that we have been a part of through the World Health Organization as a founding member since we started the World Health Organization. That includes treaties and agreements on how we conduct practices during wartime. That includes treaties and agreements on how we conduct practices during peace. That includes trade agreements. That includes all kinds of stuff. Some through the UN, some through NATO, some through the USMCA, the Mexico-Canada Trade Agreement. There are 80 different layers that you probably weren't even already familiar with of how the U.S. has already said, okay, our sovereignty is not as important, like it or not, agree with it or not. I personally don't agree with it. That's just where we're at. We have said in the past, our sovereignty is not as important as XYZ, as creating an international standard, as equity in health, as the standards of diagnoses and care and testing and all of that, whatever you want to insert into that sentiment, into that statement. That's where we've come from. And this is where we could be going. Have we implemented an international health law of any kind that has already completely stripped the United States of our sovereignty? No. Every single international health regulation that we've agreed to, and other international law, has had the caveat, but it needs to be ratified by our government, because the people who voted for their delegates, their representatives in the U.S. Senate, have a right to participate in this conversation. Frankly, I think that's not as direct as it could be. I think it should also be ratified through the House of Representatives, but I digress, or even state legislatures, or even just the people. But, that's a lot more complicated than it sounds. No, this has not passed yet, but theoretically, what makes this document different and why you should at least raise your eyebrows is that we have created a pathway that even if the US Senate didn't want to ratify this, until they go through that unbelievably tenuous process, it's going into effect anyway. Do we see why that's a problem? Do you see why people like me might have an issue with that? Or why any logical person should have an issue with that? Because when everybody's intentions are good, great. It doesn't matter who's in charge. If everybody wants to hold hands and sing Kumbaya around the fire all the time, great. Doesn't matter what the potential downside might be, right? But when things can go bad, and we've created a pathway that could theoretically be replicated for all kinds of other things, that says, who cares how long it takes Congress to ratify anything? Let's just do it. And it's just going to go into effect anyway. Do you see why that might be a problem? Of course, our friends over at PolitiFact are having an absolute field day with all of this and have fact-checked this wrong. So I'd like to tell you why. They say this is false on the PolitiFact truthometer, which I recall them saying about many a thing that has since turned out to be true, but just putting that out there into the ecosystem. The Biden admin negotiates deal to give WHO authority over U.S. pandemic policies. That was specifically in response to this article that we just talked about. False. There's Director General Tedros, the worst. The WHO pandemic accord does not replace U.S. sovereignty, says PolitiFact. Let's see why they say it. A draft of the World Health Organization on pandemic prevention has been introduced. A final version won't be presented to member states for a vote until 2024. The draft doesn't enable the WHO to dictate pandemic responses to the U.S. or any country. Language in the draft says states have the sovereign right to manage their own public health responses. Okay, well, it's a 32-page document. Feel free to read it yourself. That is true, except for this clause that's a little bit different and could theoretically be a problem. What I found fascinating about this is that they actually found statements from my professor in my graduate school program, who is one of the top well-respected experts all around the world on global health policy and international health law. This meeting that's happening on February 27th to March 3rd, I guess they're discussing the draft, but the final draft won't be ready for consideration until 2024. So keep that in mind, something to keep an eye on, but is something important to know. They quote my professor in here, which I found really funny, and PolitiFact, it's time for you to actually get facts. You spelled the name wrong. You spelled the man's name wrong. You're trying to present that you're this holier-than-thou, factual, truth-based website. You can't even spell the expert's damn name right. Really? Lawrence Gostin, who I'm sure I politically disagree with on a million different things, but is a genius, and I was very fortunate to take many of his classes at Georgetown. His last name is spelled Gostin, not Goston. PolitiFact, not to be too tedious here, but if we're checking facts, probably important to spell the man's name right. He's the director of the O'Neill Institute for National and Global Health Law at Georgetown University. He helped draft this accord and said it would not give the WHO any powers to dictate policy in the U.S. or anywhere. He said this narrative is so far from the truth that it is dangerous and malicious, who is also the director for the World Health Organization's Collaborating Center on National and Global Health Law. He said the Biden administration is acting as a good global citizen. Come on, Professor Gostin. So close. But isn't close to signing an agreement and may never do so. It is not yet clear whether signing the accord may also require Senate confirmation, he said. Red flag. Problems. Even if the U.S. signs an agreement, it would not interfere with the sovereign right of the U.S. government to make decisions about pandemic measures in the United States, who said such decisions are for Congress and public health agencies at the federal, state, and local level. Wow. Oh, Professor, I wish we could have class right now and just duke this all out, Socratic method style, because that's what it's all about. And I will say, to his credit, Professor Gostin was genuinely very interested in conversation and discussion in his classes. I always had the authority to raise my hand and to challenge something just as any other student would. And I genuinely had such a more well-rounded and educational experience in the 9 months that I spent at Georgetown than I did through 4 years of Colorado State University, where it was the professor's way or the highway, and challenging things was not welcome or expected whatsoever. I am incredibly grateful for the experience that I had at Georgetown because there was no one right answer. You were supposed to question everything. So honestly, most people knew what I did for a living. I had just started my experience as a content creator while I was in school. I was posting all kinds of very controversial things on the internet, but nobody cared because that wasn't the point. And I very much valued that about my grad school experience, which is not normal in the college experience these days. So very, very grateful for that. But all of that to be said, would I disagree with Professor Gostin on his claim that the Biden administration is acting as a good global citizen? Yes, I would. Well, maybe they're good global citizens. They're not being great to the American people right now. And therefore, I would argue are not being great to people around the world right now. Maybe other governments, but I think people are higher on the totem pole that should be on our priority list than anybody else. But beyond that, I think we still have so many people, particularly in expert positions, in leadership positions, within the very small realm, sorry, I hit my mic, within the very small realm of health law, of health policy, of health regulations, of pandemic response, of science, that for so long operated in this world that science was not political. That you followed the science based on following all of the data to its conclusive endpoint, that you were constantly walking towards pursuit of objective truth. And then when everything hit the fan in the last several years, they had no idea how to respond. And so they're clinging to this idea that things are just going to go back to the way that they were. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. I wish with every bone in my body that it was. But I've seen way too many people in positions of power take advantage of being in power just for the sake of doing it, without relinquishing that power when it was their time, that I don't think I trust. As an innate conservative, I have built-in distrust of any government entity, elected or otherwise. I don't trust those people to tell me, well, I mean, it's not really going to impact anything, right? It's not really going to solve creating this global government system. That's a conspiracy. It's not really going to circumvent Senate treaty authority. They still need to ratify everything, right? I don't know that that's right. It could be, and I would be very ecstatic for that to be right. But I've just seen one too many news stories 9 months later that would have gotten me deplatformed on any social media site, now being put out as headline news, to really believe that that's true. And I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but I immediately have some red flags going off in the back of my mind, knowing that this is off. There's just something not quite right. I wish that there was, but there's not. And therefore, we should naturally be inherently skeptical. Skepticism is not a trait of conspiracy theorists. I don't know who needs to be reminded of that today, but there's nothing wrong with reading the full document to make sure you understand what the United States is giving up in terms of our sovereignty. There is nothing wrong with reading this entire document and saying, now that I know, potentially could be problematic. Maybe not, but it could be. You should be doing that at your local and state level as well, and the federal level, not just international law. Our own elected representatives don't read 99% of the legislation that they vote on. How could they? When our average bill is thousands of pages long and on subjects that have nothing to do with what the title of the bill is. When was the last time you went to a school board meeting and actually found out what at your most close to home local level grown adults are trying to implement into the curriculum of your kids? Never? Probably not, because you never had a reason to go in the past. Go. There is nothing wrong with showing up in your community and finding out what's happening right under your nose, because it's happening every single day. At the most minute level, in the PTA of your kid's elementary school, at the school board for your local school district, at your county commissioners meeting, at the state level with your state legislature and your governor's office and your governor's administration, at the national level with your congressional representatives, with the U.S. Senate, and of course with every executive agency under the President of the United States, and even now at the global government level, as international law becomes more and more and more confusing and could potentially open a door into delaying the sovereignty of each country that is a member of the UN participating in the full ratification process. I say that potentially because it's not necessarily true yet. This is a draft document, but theoretically could pose problems in the future. Take the time to be nerdy, to unpack these things, to read the actual documents, not just a headline that obviously is meant to sensationalize things. Every single news organization and outlet in the world, whether you agree with them or you don't agree with them, is meant to get an emotional rise out of you. That's how they get you to keep clicking on things. That's how they survive, by posting the preview with just the headline on Twitter so that you click on it and read it. That's how cable news gets you to keep your eyes glued to news stations 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, because they're meant to sensationalize your feelings. Don't let them do that, at least not without reading all of the documents for yourself. Put your own eyes on this information and try to digest it the best way you can. Sometimes it's going to be so incredibly complicated that you just don't even want to give it the time of day. I get that, and I am already a political nerd. I'll sit here and read any document as long as it takes and just be interested in it because I'm a legal nerd and a political nerd and it's something that's interesting to me. If you need help, talk to somebody. Let me know if we should cover something on a live stream. I will happily dive into these things. But we can't keep electing people and not electing people, by the way, who get to make all of these decisions for us and then be pissed off 4 years down the line when we didn't know that it was happening in the first place. We have literally all of the information in the history of the universe at our fingertips at any given moment. There are no more excuses. There's no more opportunities to just read a Twitter headline and feel like you are actually educated on things. Things are a lot more complicated in 2023 than the 150 characters that you read on Twitter. Take the time to understand things. That is my challenge to you in 2023. And I wish that things weren't so complicated. John Little in our Getter chat has a great reminder. The U.S. Constitution is 4 pages long. I wish every important document was 4 pages long. Unfortunately, that's not the world that we live in today. We have 3,000-page bills specifically supposed to be about climate change that are actually about a million other things. Looking at you, Green New Deal, who say you're about climate change, but really has a lot more in there. We're going to be unpacking some interesting conversations about that in the near future. Looking at you, literally every bill on the floor of the United States House or United States Senate at the moment. Looking at you, zero draft of the World Health Organization that's currently being discussed and debated. I wish everything was 4 pages, John. It's not. That's not the world we live in today. And I hate that it's so complicated, but it deserves our attention and it deserves our curiosity at the very least. Because I don't know about you, I am tired of sensationalized, short form, emotionally driven content written on TV or otherwise that is specifically designed just to get a rise out of you when we don't know the whole story. That's why I will always be the first person to sit back and wait to comment on a really emotional story like a mass shooting or an extreme tragedy until we have all of the information, because otherwise, how can we form an educated opinion whatsoever? Otherwise, we're just bloviating hot air into the ecosystem, hoping that something will stick. But there's no value in that. And my biggest goal for 2023 as a creator is that I plan to actually say things of importance and break down things of importance and not just be another talking head, because the world has way too many of those. And I, for one, have zero interest in doing that. Icy Pops has a great point in our Getter Live chat. The last 3 years have educated me more than the last 60 years. Good. Every single year should get more and more complicated and have more and more opportunities for you to understand as many things as possible. That is a good thing, and you should take that as a challenge to learn more and more and more every single year. HV782 on YouTube says, why do they do this BS? You know, your guess is as good as mine. Because power is the most important thing in the world to way too many people. And that's the really harsh, sad reality. But it is the world that we live in today. And I think that it's sad, it's criminal, but it's also indicative of the fact that we live in a fallen world. And I can expect that these things will happen because we've been told that these things will happen. And your faith should not fall in our human leadership. Your faith should fall in something so much bigger than this world, which is a great segue into our little outro and a little preview into tomorrow, which will be very fun. Do me a huge favor before we say our good nights tonight. If you guys are not already following me or subscribed to my YouTube channel, it is totally free to watch these live streams every single night. You can hit subscribe on YouTube or follow on Getter, on Rumble, on Facebook, or on Twitter and watch these every night with me. I'm an independent creator, so it means the absolute world to me. And as we said at the beginning of the stream, there are a ton of you out of absolutely nowhere on Instagram, especially. So if you guys are part of the roughly 20,000 people that joined my Instagram community since Thursday, thank you. I'm so glad you're here. And please feel free to share any of this content with anybody who might need a good education on how this works or who is looking for somebody new to listen to, because we have a lot of fun on these streams. We're doing some more fun, less nerdy subjects throughout the week, so be excited for that. But do me a huge favor, share this with somebody that you know, hit the subscribe or the follow button to make sure that you never miss another stream or another video. And as a preview into tomorrow and segueing into your faith should be bigger than what this world has to offer, tomorrow is the first day of Lent, which if you are Catholic, you probably know exactly what that means. If you're not Catholic, you don't, but that's okay. It doesn't have to just be a Catholic thing. Lent is the 40 days that immediately comes before Easter. So we are going to be spending a lot of the next 40 days talking about some more philosophical, faith-based content, which I think is going to be very interesting. Even if you don't agree with me, I challenge you to just hear some things that we have to talk about. We're going to have some great, deep conversations that the world really doesn't want us to have, and debating how much of that I want to do on the stream versus some other content that you guys will have access to through some other platforms. So we'll do a little bit of an open forum conversation about it tomorrow and just see what you guys are interested in. So come prepared to chat in the live chat and give us your thoughts. But very excited to share some Lent information with you and share that journey with you. Lent is one of my favorite periods of the entire year. And if you're not Catholic, you probably don't know that there's traditions to give things up or to sacrifice something during the 40 days preceding Easter to try to basically like make yourself more holy and closer to God as we get closer to his ultimate sacrifice that he made for us on the cross on Good Friday and then resurrected at Easter. So if you are the feeling kind to try a new adventure and get outside of your comfort zone, I would really like to challenge you. Whether you're Catholic, Christian, atheist, whatever, spend the next 40 days thinking about something in your life that is not creating the best version of you. Maybe you're spending way too much time rewatching the same TV shows, guilty. Maybe you are spending way too much time gossiping with your friends at work or with your coworkers, and it's just kind of creating a gnawing feeling for you inside. Maybe you can't stop reaching for the candy drawer in your kitchen, which I don't really have a problem with. I'm more of a savory food person, but I know a lot of people do have a problem with. Maybe you've been wanting to try a dry month, but you didn't do dry January, as trendy as it was, and you want to try something new. So maybe you're just looking for a change to make in your life. Maybe you haven't been to the gym in way too long and you want to challenge yourself for the consistency and the sacrifice to take an hour out of your day and create a physical, better version of yourself for the next 40 days. I challenge you to pick something easy, something more difficult, whatever you want to try, and just stick to it for 40 days. We're going to call this our Lenten challenge as a community. I'll be sharing what I'll be doing for Lent tomorrow on the stream, but I think it's really important that we all take the time to sacrifice something to be a better version of ourselves. Our entire American culture is completely built around the fact that we should just love ourselves, the fact that we should just love ourselves. If we just loved ourselves more for who we are right now, we just accepted ourselves more for who we are right now, then we would be happier. And meanwhile, we have the greatest mental health crisis a generation has ever seen with current teenagers and young adults. We talked through it on the live stream last week, but 1 in 3 teenage girls has seriously contemplated taking their own life in the last year alone. I have a friend of mine who has a teenage son, and his friend took their life this last week, which is absolutely horrifying. So many of you guys have the same experience, I'm sure, with children in your life, with your kids' friends, maybe even with your own kids, which is so, so sad. And I'm so very sorry for that. And I will be praying for you very significantly through this time. But I'm looking around at the state of affairs in our culture right now. And simultaneously, while we're saying we should just accept ourselves for who we are now, because we're perfect just the way we are, and we're amazing just the way we are, and everybody should just love us just the way we are, we're also the most miserable we've literally ever been. Pushing ourselves into a corner, saying it's better for us to not be here at all than to be experiencing what we are constantly propagating. Maybe it's time for a change in your own life. Maybe it's time to work on a different version of yourself, a self-improvement version of yourself, and to find gratitude in that process. So spend some time tonight, 30 minutes or so, just thinking about what you want to do for the next 40 days. It could be as simple as not gossiping and shutting down those conversations at work or walking away from them. It could be as difficult as working out for an hour every day and trying a crazy new diet or something, or cutting alcohol or whatever. Think about it. We're going to talk about it tomorrow. It's going to be a really fun stream. I will look a little different with my ashes cross on my forehead, so that'll be fun. If you guys are sporting those, you can drop those in the chat too. Tomorrow, it'll be very, very fun. Thank you again to Public Square for sponsoring this stream. Don't forget to follow, tell the truth, be good people, share this with somebody who really needs just a brief breakdown. And I say brief because I'm not the expert, although I did learn from the experts on this, on international health law. And we will see you guys tomorrow for a very, very fun Lent kickoff stream. Have a great night.